Hey y'all, welcome to Alley Cat Customs. Today we're building a full fuel system from the fuel cell to the injectors that is capable of over 1,000 horsepower. So y'all stick around. All right, so the most critical part of building an engine is being able to get fuel to the engine, because if the engine calls for fuel and you don't have it there to burn, it'll burn a hole in the piston, and nobody wants that going down the track. And with people using power adders and engines that's gaining more and more horsepower every day, and even the advent of using E85 fuel, needing to have, with E85, you got to get 30% more fuel to the engine. So having a good, reliable fuel system that is capable of handling the horsepower is very critical to building a good, reliable race truck. And since a truck like this is going to be a street-driven truck, and also take it to the track and try to run a number at the track, having a good, reliable fuel system is absolutely necessary. So we're going to be, this fuel system is going to be capable, can be capable of upwards of 1,500 horsepower, but also scalable down to where it can run with a 500 horsepower engine. This truck has a 408, which has about in the neighborhood of 550 horsepower to the wheel right now, but he's already looking at putting a Pro Charger on this truck and going to be around 1,100 horsepower. So we're going to get this thing put together and show y'all all the features and how we're going to make this fuel system work. So let's get started. Let's do it. This is a foam baffle that goes inside the aluminum fuel cell. The fuel cell we're using has internal baffles in it, but this foam ensures that all the fuel will stay close to the fuel pumps to be able to get to it even when the fuel level is low. So what we're doing right here is actually cutting it to size to fit in the fuel cell. And the black section you see is a rubber bucket that the fuel pumps will sit down on, and that helps trap fuel against the fuel socks to make sure that the fuel pumps still have fuel even when the fuel level is very low. So you just make sure you get it all squared up and stuffed down inside the fuel cell and lined up. And as you can see, it's all the way to the bottom of the fuel cell.
All right, so we've got the kind of the depth rod here, and what this is actually used for, it actually mounts the pumps to the rod, which then goes to the hat. So what you got to do first is you've actually got to get the proper depth on this rod from where the pumps sit to the bottom of the tank. So what I actually did was I actually took the rod here, went ahead and put it in the hat, screwed it in as far as it would go, and then I used this nut to actually get the measurement from where the rod went into the hat. So we've got that there. So then I took the rod out with the nut on there. And so from there, come over here to the tank, set this down in here, bottom out in the bottom of the tank, and then I got a mark lined up with the top of the lip on the top of the tank right here. So I've got that. Then I took my tape measure and I actually measured this length from the bottom of the stud to the nut, and then I made a secondary mark because that's actually going to be my true depth to the bottom of the tank. So from there, we're going to cut at that line. But in all honesty, as long as it's just close, you're good, because you've actually got some adjustment here. When the tank or when the pumps are sitting in the tank, you've actually got some adjustment here, so you can actually move and slide this a little bit. So you've got some play there. You don't want, if you cut too much of the rod off, then you got a problem. Then then you've got some issues there. As long as you're close, you've got some movement there. So should be fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it at this secondary line here, and then we'll double check it. And if I have to, I can cut a touch more off, but I'd much rather have to recut than not cut enough, or then cut too much, and then I'm out a rod. So that's how we're gonna do that.
The fuel pumps we're using are Aeromotive's 340s. So we have dual fuel pumps going into this fuel tank. and they are attached to the aluminum bracket using a pair of hose clamps to hold them in place. So that's what James and Chandler are doing, is actually trying to line both pumps up together on the aluminum bracket. Once they get both pumps on the aluminum bracket, James slides it down on the fuel pump depth rod that is attached to the fuel hat. We're not connecting any of the fuel lines or any of the wires or anything. This is just strictly to check the fuel depth. So once he gets it where he wants it, then he can slide the whole assembly into the fuel cell to check the depth to see where the adjustments need to be made. Once we're happy with the location of the fuel pumps on the depth rod, Chandler is going to take a paint pen and mark all the locations so that we can take it apart and connect the fuel lines. So everything will be taken apart and then reconnected. So having that paint pen really helps out on reassembly.
All right, so there, got everything put together. There is one thing that you need to be very careful on whenever you run this hat and this setup. So on this, you've got your auxiliary pump and you've got your main pump. When you plug this stuff in, you want to make sure that you have the main plugged into the main and the auxiliary plugged in the auxiliary. If you don't, when you go to hook everything up, you're gonna cut the vehicle on and your setup is not going to work because you're going to have it wired improperly. So make sure that whenever you hook this up that you have your main to main and your auxiliary to your auxiliary with the lines and the plugs. So just wanted to touch on that real quick. So
now that everything's connected properly, the fuel pump assembly can be finally installed in the fuel cell. This is also when the fuel sending unit is installed, but be careful because the 99 to 02 GM trucks use a different sending unit than the 03 to 07 trucks. And I've got a video explaining that and how to correct that coming up soon. Before we could put speed parts on, we got to remove the stock stuff. So all the original fuel rails and everything are coming off the truck. The original fuel rails are being replaced with these. These are dual feed style fuel rails. So what that means is both fuel rails will have fuel going in and going out separately from the fuel pressure regulator.
Okay, so we got the Aeromotive hot wire kit put in the truck here. So pretty much I put the relay, just ran a self-tapper right here against the front of the truck. And then we grounded it right here to this bolt here. And then from there, we ended up just putting the fuse right here, and that will probably get relocated. Don't really like how that's just kind of sitting there, so we'll tuck that somewhere else another time. But then on the trigger wire, we ended up tracing the gray wire that is actually the stock wiring for the pump in the rear, and it's the gray wire. So we ended up tracing it from the back, and we came all the way up here. We ended up tapping it right here to this gray wire. So this is going to be our trigger wire here. So then if we move on to the back of the truck here, so we've got the harness running all the way from the front, all the way back, and then we've got it to the positive and negative. And now we're going to have Chandler turn the truck on, and hopefully we hear a little hissing sound, meaning that the pump is working. So Chandler, hit it. Perfect, excellent, good to go. All right, so I guess the next thing we got to do is start running lines from here up to the front. So we'll get after that here in just a bit.
Now comes the fun job of routing all the fuel lines. We're running twin -8s to a large Y to a -10 line and going under the cab with it. While James is cutting this line and installing a fitting on it, I'll give you a quick tutorial on how to put a fitting on the end of a PTFE fuel line. First, he wraps the line with some masking tape and then uses a cutoff wheel on a grinder to cut it in two. Then he slides the locking nut onto the fuel line and slides it back up out of the way. Now he gently pulls back the outer sheath to allow room for the ferrule to slide onto the inner fuel line. With the sheath pulled back, he's able to lube the fuel line up and then install the ferrule. He uses a tool to drive the ferrule down onto the fuel line, and then uses the same tool to clean the inside of the fuel line out to make sure it has no burrs or anything on the inside of the line. Now he slides the fitting into the fuel line and then connects the locking nut to it. Now that the locking nut is connected to the fitting, he puts it in a vise and has some soft jaws to hold the locking nut in place. And then using an aluminum crescent wrench, he tightens it up and connects the line together. And ta-da, one PTFE fitting on the line, connected and ready to go. All right, so now we've got the fuel pump installed in the fuel cell. We had installed the fuel cell, and we've got all the lines routed, ran, and have already primed the system. And as you can see, we have some extra fuel line laying on top of the fuel cell. That's to aid in if we ever need to drop the fuel cell out. Makes it a whole lot easier to drop the fuel cell down to get to the lines, to get everything loose. But coming from the twin fuel pumps, we're running two 8 AN lines out to a large Y. From that, we're running a 10 AN line down under the truck. So I'm gonna raise the truck up and show you how the underside of the truck is routed right now. All right, so under the truck here, we have 10 AN line running to a fuel filter, and just past the fuel filter, we have a flex fuel sensor, and it's basically just a GM flex fuel sensor with a Motion Raceworks kit to allow it to work, to give full fuel flow. Everything works great on that. We're going to be boosting this truck later on, so we'll be able to go from regular gas to E85 for more power down the road. So everything about this is to get the most flow as possible and the best tunability so we can get the most power. So after the flex fuel sensor, we run to another Y, and we run twin 8s up to the back of the fuel rails. So I'm going to take you out there and show you the fuel rails and where the regulator is. So let's go up top. All right, so moving up front here, we're using aftermarket fuel rails, and we're feeding the front of the fuel rails and using a 4 Innovation tight 180 on the driver's side behind the alternator. About the only fitting we could find that was tight enough to fit and work with these rails. And all the parts and stuff were used, we'll show those in the description. I'll have a write-up of all the parts used in the description. And we did the crossover for both rails to feed back to the aeromotive fuel regulator. So it's got 2 ends and 1 out and return back to the tank. So it's sitting up here on the external regulators on the sitting on the firewall, easy to get to, so you can set your fuel pressure and check, make sure everything's right on it. So that wraps up the fuel system on this truck. So we're about to test fire the truck, make sure everything works, make sure we have no leaks. And when we get done with that, this truck will be ready to wrap up and get put on the road so we can make some passes. All right, fire it up, or turn the thing on, let's check for leaks. Yep. Trying to see the fuel pressure.
Is it holding pressure?
Yeah, it's holding pressure.
Holding pressure, perfect.
Yeah, everything looks good here.
I'm good here.
Yep. All right, you want to go ahead and fire it up?
Go ahead and fire it. Fire it up.
It's 58. Everything good on the back?
That's good.
Check it out.
58, right on the money.
Yep.
Please.
All right, you can kill it. All righty, so that pretty much wraps this fuel system up. This fuel system is overkill for a 500 horsepower engine, but this truck is in a steady build. We're going to be boosted pretty soon on it. And this fuel system is completely scalable all the way down from 500 horsepower up to 1500 horsepower. So using the parts and stuff like this makes a good, reliable fuel system for a street-driven truck or car or whatever you're going to run with an LS-based engine. It's a great setup, and it's going to be working really well for Chandler when we get this truck on the road and at the track. So I hope y'all found this video helpful, and if you did, make sure you like and subscribe so you can see the rest of this build right here at Alley-Cat Customs. Talk.
So, you need to put the lock ring on before you put the fittings on, just so you know. Yeah. So let's take those off.
How do you know?
No, the saying is, ask me how I know.
Yeah, ask me how I know, yeah.
So,
One of them deals. What you start with?
oh, duh. I'm like, those are on there very tight. Well, James, if you turn them the right way, they're not.
Yeah, we're not doing ring gear bolts on 10 volt.